The biggest thing that surprises me by the trans controversies is how fast they've taken over. I mean, we've seen other situations in healthcare and medical healthcare where the people who are supposed to be in charge and making sure things stick to the evidence, there have been slips in the past, multiple personalities, the satanic panic, the recovered memories, uh, and even physical medicine, stents, meshes, feeding babies formula instead of mothers nursing their children. I mean, medicine has, for some situations, made this mistake before. I was surprised, alerted, shocked, to see one happen, I want to say that I was surprised to see one happen, in my own field, but, it's sex. We have so controversial issues, it's always a matter of time. Uh, but the thing that surprised me is that, unlike, breastfeeding and recovered memories and so on, how fast this one pretty literally went viral. That's the thing that shocked me, how quickly it's moved. Uh, People, the particular phrase, being born in the wrong body, perfectly reasonable here and there as a metaphor, but people are taking metaphors as literal truths. People are taking subjective evidence and making decisions on it that we normally would reserve for the most solid and objective evidence. We're sending into surgery, to operate and remove healthy tissue, but giving it, the same bar of evidence that we would use for taking out a tumor. It's all of which is on top of, even though everybody, keeps saying, oh, you need mental health professionals and you need a robust diagnosis. Nobody knows how to do that. We can't predict which of these kids, if any, or of what proportion will benefit versus not. So we have the least knowledge, the least outcomes, and the least ability to correctly pick out which one in these 100 will benefit. And we're applying the most dramatic interventions available to us. Now, I'm not an ideologue. I mean, I often have been one of the advocates for transition for adults who have lived part of their life, know what they're sacrificing. But we had much more solid evidence for them than for children. But we're treating child cases as if we had the level of evidence and the objective, reliable indications that we just don't have. The studies of the brain in trans populations, the study of the brain in sexuality have found homosexuality is in the brain, gender identity is not. But very many trans people are also homosexual relative to their birth sex. So depending on who's in your study, you'll get different confusing mixes because the stuff in the brain that's there because of homosexuality is easy to mistake for stuff in the brain for transsexuality. But when you pile it all together, homosexuality is in the brain, both male and female. Gender identity is not. But some of the studies compared homosexual transsexuals with heterosexual cis people and said, see transsexuality in the brain, when no, what they found was homosexuality in the brain. So that's as I say, people will cite whichever studies line up with their belief system. Now, there are other things in the brain. There are other, that's the part that's relevant for children. Adults show a completely different pattern. When I say adults, I mean people who didn't really start becoming gender dysphoric until adulthood. They knew they were different. They had, they were a little bit odd sometimes, especially socially when they were young, but basically heterosexual, usually married, often almost always male. Had a wife, has kids, and then in their 30s or 40s decide, before it's too late, a Caitlyn Jenner kind of a profile. Would never have picked the person out of a crowd, not a whiff of femininity about them until they get to a point in life where, before it's too late, I gotta try this. Completely different pattern from the highly effeminate or tomboyish ones in kids where they stick out like a sore thumb, and when they come out as gay, you go, surprise, surprise. That adult onset type also seems to have a brain signature to it, but unrelated to sexual orientation, unrelated to homosexuality. It's related to a pattern unto itself and related to a paraphilia. The trans community hate this idea because it makes that kind of trans person seem less genuine, when the evidence doesn't say that. The evidence actually is much stronger for their transition than the kids. But it's called autogynephilia. These are kind of like men who are not just into searching for the brain, looking for women in the environment. It wants to project signals of that femininity to the environment. It's like they're attracted to the woman within. And that motivates a large chunk of cross-dressers, not the, drag queen need type, but the more, it's part of their sex thing. For people with other atypical sexualities, again, it will often have a cross-dressy or fetishy element to it. And for some people, it's strong enough and concrete enough that they actually live perfectly healthy lives as female. And that fetish is called autogynephilia. Dirty word in large chunks of the trans community, and a popular idea in other chunks. Take your pick. Okay, so they also seem to be different in the brain, but because of the paraphilia rather than because of the sexual orientation. And I think because they're mostly the activists, they want to treat the children the way they wish they were treated when they were that age, even though these are unrelated phenomena. They have nothing to do with each other. So the brain is in there, but it's not in there in the, you have a trans brain. That's not it. It's, you have a gay brain. And for some people, it's kind of like, you're so gay, you really might be happier living as the other sex. And for some people, it's, yep, you're really autogynephilic. You might be so autogynephilic, you might actually be happier living as the other sex. So unrelated motivations, they just, when they describe their subjective experience, they use the same words. Like if a patient comes in, doc, I have a headache. Stress headache, head injury, migraine. They will all say headache. Their descriptions will sound the same, but the best thing for these people are completely unrelated to each other.